Walk with me through the halls of the Comic Kingdom. The Magician from Mars, the first superheroine of comic books. Today, she is a very obscure character. Her run in comic books was terribly brief. She made only 5 appearances in a monthly title. Still, the Magician from Mars is an important part of comic history. She was, definitely, the first superpowered female of comic books. Magician from Mars came before Fantomah, who debuted in February of 1940, and Wonder Woman, who debuted in October of 1941. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, actually predates Magician from Mars, but most people do not consider Sheena a superheroine, especially during the golden age of comics. Later versions of Sheena would have superpowers, definitely making her a superheroine. But in the golden age, Sheena was, for all intents and purposes, a female version of Tarzan. For all you curiosity seekers, Sheena made her first ever appearance in a British magazine called Wags, issue number 46, dated January 1938. Sheena's first real American appearance was in Jumbo Comics number 1 from September 1938. The first actual superheroine came out in 1909 and was called L'Oiseau, French for the bird. She was not in comic books because they didn't exist back then, but appeared in serialized story form in a magazine. The character, created by a woman, was a sexy woman in a bird costume that allowed her flight. She used her technology to fight criminals. But Magician from Mars, in late 1939, was the first superheroine of comic books, and wow, was she an impressive character. Magician's smash debut. When did Magician from Mars start? She made her very first appearance in Amazing Man Comics number 7 from November 1939. Amazing Man was only the second superhero to have his very own comic title. Superman was the first. Believe it or not, the first issue of this series was numbered 5. Weird things like that happen with comic books in the Golden Age. So Magician from Mars first appeared in the series only 3 issues in. Magician from Mars played an important part in developing Amazing Man Comics. The usual practice back then was for a comic book title to have a leading feature and several backing features. Something had to link all the features together, although none of them really crossed over into each other or shared continuity. For instance, Amazing Man was a strong man with superpowers, a regular tough guy super stud. It was a natural choice to put other manly tough guy heroes, superhero or not, as features in the comic. And since they each had to stand out in some way, why not make one of them a woman? Magician from Mars was created by artists John Giunta and Malcolm Kildale. Who wrote these stories? That is unclear. In the Golden Age, especially, a lot of artists and writers didn't get the credit they deserved. It was not unusual, though, for the artist to also be the writer. So John Giunta probably wrote the stories. It would make sense, as Giunta had a fondness for science fiction that developed further in the years to come. Kildale probably did the inking in the first story and maybe helped Giunta develop the character. I'll talk more about these guys later on in the video, as they were both highly significant people in early adventure comics. For now, Magician from Mars is what we're focusing on. In Magician's first story, her real name is given as Jane 6EM35. From her second story on, her real name is given as Jane QX3. We can only assume that her last name was changed to make it sound more rocket-like. It's significant because rockets or some kind of aircraft feature in every one of her adventures. Jane was born on Mars, at an unspecified date in the future. Interplanetary travel is commonplace, so the fact that her mother was an Earthling and her father was a Martian is not so unusual. Hey, what do you know? The first biracial superheroine in comics. As a newborn, Jane is accidentally exposed to cathode rays by a nurse, unbeknownst to her parents and the doctor. It would not have affected most babies, but since Jane was a half-breed, the rays had an amazing effect on her. Keep in mind, this was over 2 decades before the Fantastic Four, when those heroes were given superpowers by cosmic rays. Jane's ray bath, however, produced more fantastic results. If there was anything this woman couldn't do, it wasn't mentioned louder than a whisper. Jane could use 100% of her brain and had telekinesis among other mental abilities. Super strength, even in 1939, was standard for comic heroes. She could defy gravity, time and space, make herself giant size, create illusions, transform matter, and possessed immortality. Wow! Are we sure she was just a magician from Mars? Or was she goddess from Mars? Jane first discovers her powers at age 6. We are not told what happened to Jane's father, but her mother raises her on Mars. The only person who is openly aware of Jane's powers is her mother, who tells her to keep it secret. By the age of 16, Jane is an orphan. We are not told what happened to her mother either. Jane's Aunt Kanza becomes her guardian. Kanza hates Jane for some reason, and tries confining her to a windowless steel cell. Why Kanza hates Jane is unclear, but she's definitely the wicked stepmother figure in this saga. Jane has long wanted to flee to Earth by this point, and finally defying her aunt, easily breaks out of the cell and hops aboard an Earthbound rocket ship. Jane changes her dress to an aviator type outfit, also dubbing herself the Magician from Mars. She does 2 major acts of heroism in her first adventure. First, she saves the damaged rocket ship. Second, she takes $3 million in gold from the ship and gives half of it to a doctor for his work in curing infantile paralysis. This was obviously a nod to the real-life problem of polio, which was a hot button back then and only got worse until the Salk vaccine came out in 1955. In 1939, though, people were a bit more reserved, so the name of polio wasn't going to be put in a comic book meant for light reading. Jane keeps the other half of the money for her future heroine endeavors. Why she needed any money at all is beyond me. She could make things materialize out of thin air and travel great distances just by thinking about it. If she wanted to, she could even create money. Oh well, you have to forgive some of the writing in comic books if you're going to enjoy them at all. Golden Age or modern. The continuing saga of the Magician from Mars. By Jane's second story, in Amazing Man Comics number 8, a few things are established. For one thing, Jane is hot. I don't think she's 16 anymore. If she's still supposed to be 16, then she's a rather developed 16. She's no longer dressed as an aviatrix, but in skimpy clothing consisting of a sleeveless white shirt and red short shorts with ankle boots. Secondly, the story ideas and action are pretty awesome. You couldn't have made this character into a live-action movie back in 1939. Heck, you would barely be able to make a movie nowadays with the special effects needed to bring some of this to life. And today's special effects are pretty awesome. The Magician from Mars was way ahead of her time in a lot of regards. But what held these comics back from being more successful? Well, a number of things. For one, most people didn't like female-led action stories. They still don't, and a lot of attempts have been made. That's just the way it is. I, for one, like women heroes. But during the golden age of comics, it was a boys' medium for sure. And boys preferred seeing cool, tough macho dudes taking care of business. Heck, I like that too. But a man can't live on meat alone. Sometimes you need potatoes. And the magician from Mars was one hot potato. Another drawback to these comic stories is the art. For most of her adventures, the art really isn't very good. It's not the worst I've seen by a long shot, but it's not as sleek and polished as it should be, especially for a feminine hero. These are still highly readable adventures, and I think there was a lot of life left in this series, but it's not the prettiest to look at. The name of the character doesn't really ring out. Magician from Mars doesn't roll off the tongue. Magic Girl, or something along that order, would have been easier to say, and it would have been more specific to what she is. The Centaur publisher, who published Amazing Man comics, struggled their entire existence, and only ran from 1938 to 1942. I think they were an excellent publisher, and they came out with a lot of awesome comic books. They also did a lot of significant things in early comics. Sadly, though, they didn't really have any huge characters. Nothing that equaled the popularity of Superman, Captain Marvel, or Captain America. And they just couldn't make it. Centaur also had poor distribution, a big factor in them not having huge successes. With Magician from Mars just being a backing feature for one title at Centaur, it's obvious why her time was short. But it's an absolute shame because I think they really had something. In her third adventure, in Amazing Man Comics number 9, she wears an even sexier red outfit with midriff-bearing top, miniskirt, and go-go boots before they were even a thing. Jane keeps introducing new abilities to us, like making herself giant size and being able to sing like an angel. Nothing seems very plausible in her adventures, but they're a blast to read. The action and story ideas hit you like a scattergun. Also, beginning with number 9, she's actually piloting an airplane. Hey, in the 1930s and 40s, airplanes were deemed cool and trendy. Still, it makes little sense as to why she needed a plane, given her seemingly unlimited abilities. By issue number 10, her fourth adventure, the character begins to show some stability. She wears the same outfit for a second time, something that had never been done before, and she finally gains an arch nemesis called the Hood. Not surprising, the Hood is a mysterious, hooded and robed figure. He also has similar abilities to the Magician from Mars, making him the heroine's first viable threat. And the Magician is still flying the plane. A promising future, dashed to bits. Her story in issue 11 is bittersweet. It's an awesome entry that really establishes the character and gives us the best art of the series. It's also the last entry, leaving us with unfinished business. For the first time, Jane the Magician is given an actual costume. It's not as sexy as what she was wearing before, but it's a definite costume. The Hood is her definite arch rival, and the stakes have been raised. Since Jane left Mars, war has erupted on her home planet. The Hood is the leader of the terrorist faction. Jane decides to return to Mars for the first time wearing what she calls her new uniform. It's a costume. She has to take a spaceship to Mars. Seriously, hopping from one planet to another may be the only superpower she doesn't have, requiring a spaceship. She had to take one from Mars to get to Earth in her first adventure, and now she needs one to go back. On Mars, Jane gains a love interest for the first time with Prince Tal. It's to be shorter lived than this story, however, as he takes a laser blast from the Hood meant for the Magician from Mars. Right after that, it is revealed that the Hood is not a he, but a she, Jane's hated Aunt Kanza. It is revealed that Kanza also has magic powers, although they aren't the equal of Jane's. This explains a lot as to why Kanza hated Jane in the first story. She saw Jane as a threat. Kanza disappears, making Jane swear for vengeance that, unfortunately for us, we never get to see. There was a lot of room for this saga to go. Did Kanza have anything to do with the death of Jane's parents? Does Jane return to Earth or stay on Mars? Jane won the war on Mars, but she had a bigger problem to deal with. We'll never know how the saga would have played out, but since she is now a public domain character, I would be interested in seeing any continuation of The Magician from Mars. What happened to Amazing Man Comics after The Magician from Mars? Beginning in the next issue, number 12, her feature was replaced with the brand new Reef Kincaid. This was about as different from The Magician as you could get. It was a straight-ahead action feature with a macho sailor hero. I like Reef Kincaid, especially his early comics, but he was very simple compared to his predecessor. Reef was created by the excellent Bob Lubbers, and the character enjoyed a much longer life than Magician, running through issue number 22 of Amazing Man Comics. Reef's adventures got crazier as they went along, but he started off very down to earth, and he never got as crazy as the Magician. He made one last appearance in Stars and Stripes Comics number 2 from 1941, and that was it. The Amazing Man Comics series ran through number 26, cover dated January 1942. It ran for close to 2 years after The Magician from Mars was abruptly canceled. The men behind The Magician. So what happened to the creators of Magician from Mars? Where'd they end up? John Giunta, who gets first billed in all the comics, was only 19 when he started this. He later became a very esteemed artist in comic books, and his artwork improved markedly. John worked on a lot of horror comics for various publishers throughout the next few decades. In 1944, he was the first to do a comic version of the Cisco Kid. He really came into his own in the 1960s, when he started drawing for superheroes like The Fly at Archie Comics, Thunder Agents at Tower Comics, and the Phantom Stranger at DC. It's important to note that people really love all these characters. They're not the best known superheroes in the world, but they all have faithful followings. John died in 1970 at the age of 50. What about Malcolm Kildale? He did inks on the first story, and dropped out after Magician from Mars' first adventure. I'm not sure why he dropped out, but it didn't hurt him. As a matter of fact, he had already created a well-received superhero character before this called Speed Centaur. Speed Centaur first appeared in Amazing Mystery Funnies number 12, cover dated August 1939, from the Centaur publisher. The idea is that Speed is actually a centaur creature, half man, half horse, in the present day, fighting all sorts of criminals and monsters and things. I freaking love this superhero. A lot of people dub this character as one of the oddest, if not the oddest superhero of all time. I think that's unfair. The only thing odd about him is that he's a centaur. There are lots of weirder superheroes. Kildale worked on a lot of other comics as well, and around the same time he was trying to market this and other centaur characters into newspaper comic strips. Malcolm may have been just too busy to keep working on Magician from Mars with all this other stuff going on. He had a bit more age on him than John Giunta, being 25 when he did Magician from Mars. In 1943, during World War II, Malcolm signed up for the Navy, and this pretty much ended his comic book career. He continued as an artist, however, for other mediums, while also working in other occupations. He died in 1970 at the age of 57, shortly after John Giunta had died. As far as Michael Morando goes, there really isn't a lot of information out there about him. This is an injustice, because he played a pretty big part in The Magician from Mars. Morando's career in comics appears to have been brief, ending sometime in the early 1940s. I don't believe he worked in comics past the closure of Centaur. He created another, very brief superhero character at Centaur called The Voice, who I believe deserved a lot more than the few appearances he got. But that's how things played out. The Magician from Mars today. Unfortunately, she remains a very obscure superheroine character, and she shouldn't be at all. Time went on, and many more superheroine characters were created. Some flopped with just one or a few appearances, but a handful of them really took off. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, was not really a superheroine character back then, but she was an extremely popular comic book heroine who debuted before The Magician and remained extremely popular for many years. Her adventures, though, did get pretty wild, so it's easy to see Sheena as a superheroine. She also kickstarted the countless number of Jungle Girl imitators that came out in comics and movies. A popular superheroine that made her debut after Magician from Mars wrapped is Phantom Lady. She debuted in Police Comics number 1, cover dated August 1941, from the Quality publisher. Today, the character is owned by DC. But the biggest superheroine of the Golden Age, or any time period, is Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is huge, and continues to be to this day. She debuted in All-Star Comics number 8, cover dated December 1941 to January 1942, from the DC publisher when they were known as National. I love Wonder Woman. She's a great character with a great saga and a great look. However, had the character of Magician from Mars been a success, and if she was still running at the same time as Wonder Woman, she may have given her popularity a run for its money. The Magician was becoming more polished with each appearance and, had she gone on, would have gotten better in art and writing. When you look back at the earliest appearances of Sheena and Phantom Lady, they weren't all that polished either. But they were great heroines, given a chance to succeed, and they did. The Magician from Mars is a high-ranking subject, worthy of her status in the comic kingdom.